Okay, so this video is on angle pair relationships, and there's 5 different angle relationships we're going to look at. Of those 5 relationships, there's really 3 big ideas, or 3 groups, that these will get put into. The first big idea is that things will add to 90. Second one is that things will add to 180. And the third one is that things will be congruent. And we'll look how to set up the equations and which of the 5 angle relationships falls into each one of these categories: adding to 90, adding to 180, or being congruent. So the first type of angle relationship, angle pair relationship we're going to look at is complementary angles. Complementary angles add to 90. And we'll look at how to set up an equation here in a second. But the big idea is that these add to 90 degrees. The 2 angles don't have to be touching each other. So if we look at this first example here, let's suppose that this angle is 20 degrees. Now the second angle, if they're complementary, the 2 angles would have to add to 90. So we would do 90 minus 20, and most of you can probably do this in your head. The other angle would be 70 degrees. Now this other angle is called the complement to the first. Comes from the name complementary. So 2 angles that add to 90 degrees are complementary angles. They're complements of each other if they add to 90. That's an example using numbers. Let's look at an example. Suppose we had, let's say, 3x and 2x. And we want to say that those are complementary angles. To set up an equation, we would add the 2 small parts, 3x and 2x, and then complementary angles add to 90, so we would set it equal to 90. And then you would solve this equation. So key idea is that the first angle plus the second one equals 90 degrees. Okay? Second angle pair relationship we're going to look at is perpendicular. It's very similar to 90. Perpendicular means that 2 rays or 2 lines intersect with each other to form 90 degrees. So we mark that by putting the box in the corner to show that they're perpendicular rays or perpendicular lines or perpendicular line segments, that they make 90 degrees. Now, what would happen is that you'll have an interior point, and if we connect that interior point with the vertex of our angle, we end up with 2 complementary angles. So then it becomes just like the 2 at the top. 2 examples at the top, either using numbers or using an expression. So perpendicular is the same idea as complementary. It's going to add to 90, which is your big idea. Those 2 are the first big idea. They're going to add to 90. They're the only 2 angle relationships in this video that are going to add to 90. So complementary and perpendicular, remember, they go with 90 degrees. The next angle relationship is supplementary, and it's going to add to 180. Supplementary means that the 2 angles add to 180. If we look at it, they're going to make a straight line, or the 2 together are going to be opposite rays. Together they will be a linear pair. All words that basically mean the same thing, depends on what I'm asking for, but they're supplementary angles. So suppose that this angle is 110 degrees. The other angle, we would do 180 minus 110, and we would get 70. So the second angle is 70 degrees. And just like with complementary, the second angle is the supplement, comes from supplementary, of the first. So supplementary again means add to 180. The angles are supplements of each other. If we're going to have expressions in there and we want to set up an equation, suppose we've got, let's say 10x plus 1 and 6x minus 3. To set up our equation, we would add the 2 angles together. So 10x plus 1 plus 6x minus 3, and we would set them equal to 180, because the big idea is that they add to 180. So again, the 2 small angles add to 180 this time for supplementary. the second big idea that I gave you at the beginning. So first big idea, add to 90, that's complementary and perpendicular. Second big idea, add to 180, that's going to be supplementary angles. Last two big ideas, vertical angles and an angle bisector. Let's talk about vertical angles first. Vertical angles have to be from two intersecting lines. They could be line segments, but the two things have to intersect to form this X shape in the figure. And the vertical angles are the ones across from each other. Vertical does not mean that they're up and down. They're going to be left and right from each other also. It could be diagonally across from each other. It just depends on how your picture looks. Okay, but they're the ones across from each other. So I'm going to label them with shapes. These two with squares, those are vertical angles. I'm going to mark these congruent, how we mark angles congruent. Put hash marks on them with an arc between them to show that those two angles are congruent. And that's the relationship here. Vertical angles are congruent to each other. With congruent things, to set up your equation, you set them equal to each other. So suppose this one here with the square is 6x minus 3, and this one is 2x plus 5. To set up our equation, we would say 6x minus 3 equals 2x plus 5. They have to be the same thing. They have to be congruent if they're vertical angles. So we set them equal. Angle bisector is different than vertical angles. Your angles, or your line segments, your rays, whatever you're talking about, in your picture are not going to intersect to make that X shape. You will start with an angle, and a bisector means it cuts the angle in half. So you'll have another ray coming out of your angle to cut them in half so that this side is congruent to this side. If they're congruent, remember you set them equal to each other. If you've got an equation, or suppose that this one was 25 degrees, that means this one has to be 25 degrees. Because they're equal, they're congruent. So let's go over your three big ideas again. Things that add to 90 are complementary angles and perpendicular. When you set up your equation, you'll take the two small angles and set them equal to 90. Add them and set them equal to 90. Supplementary, same idea as complementary and perpendicular, but they add to 180. Okay, so the equation would be set up the same way. Two small angles add to 180 this time though. And then vertical angles and your angle bisector are both going to be congruent. So if you set up an equation, you're going to set them equal to each other. Or if one is 50 degrees, the other one has to be 50 degrees. We'll do more work with this in class, but I want you to get a general idea of how they're grouped. The things that add to 90, the things that add to 180, and the things that are congruent. So make sure if you've got questions, you either go back and watch the video again or bring them to class next time.